So the next part we want to talk about with visual design is around fonts and typography. Typography is the art and technique of arranging type to make written language readable and beautiful. Font size and types like color and hierarchy can help to convey the tone and style of the template and charts. Though some of us may be limited by company guidelines on fonts, having an understanding of the fonts can help in your overall template design. So first of all, if you've never considered fonts before other than scanning through the drop-down list to find something, there are a couple of main attributes to consider around fonts. The major one being serif versus sans serif. So serifs are the extra lines or hooks coming off of letters. In the screenshot here, we can see in Cambria the extra lines at the bottom of the M and at the top of the B as two examples, whereas below in Calibri, we notice that the B is just the essential line. Sans serif are generally considered easier to read on a screen, while serif are generally better for print. Another attribute of fonts to consider is character spacing. You can adjust this in Excel, but primarily we're talking about the distance, between letters and, maybe narrowly packed, like there's an Arial narrow, or maybe some wider fonts. And so why does character spacing matter? Well, it's primarily around readability. If you have a very kind of narrow or closely spaced font, it can be much more difficult to read in smaller sections. So when we think about our template design, we're probably going to have, we're going to have chart labels, we're going to have axis labels and numbers. And so we're probably going to have some smaller fonts. And so if we pick a particular font and then get down to those smaller levels where it might be difficult to read, we can use character spacing to increase the distance between those letters to make it easier to read. So small fonts packed tightly together are difficult to read, so you may want to add some additional spacing between those. And really the overall goal is to make it easier to view the information or easier to read the fonts and interpret the information. So the next thing you might be wondering is, okay, well, that's all great, but how do I actually go about picking a font? Because there's a lot of them. And so here are some kind of questions to, ask yourself as you're scrolling through the list or considering different fonts. So one might be, who's doing the speaking? Is it a person, or a machine? So this gets to the serif versus sans serif piece around the voice of the fonts. So for our particular template, I'm going to lean towards machine. I think we're talking about data, we're talking about open jobs. This isn't necessarily a human-delivered message, so I'm going to lean towards sans serif for our piece. Is the message hard or soft? Are we trying to deliver something strongly or a little bit easier to digest? So I would say here probably a hard font for the purposes of our dashboard would be very difficult to view over the course of the entire piece. So I don't really think our message is hard here. We're really just trying to convey information. So we'll probably lean towards a softer font. Who is talking to whom? Can we put a style of speech to the font? If you were to look at these particular fonts, who would you imagine saying it? What does their voice sound like? For me, I kind of want the voice to be mellow. I want the charts and the data to stand out, so I don't really want my text to take over. So I'm going to imagine kind of a very neutral tone or neutral delivery. Also, when is it? Are we looking at something maybe that's a little bit more classic or historical, or are we looking at something maybe in the future? So we might want to consider various fonts and their time periods as well. Again, for our template, this is going to be updated weekly. It's happening right now. So I want something that kind of is current, something today. And then also the style. Are there kind of particular other style options around the font that we want to consider as well? So if a font is all caps, for instance, it might be really standing out. Think of like all caps in chat or email, someone shouting at you. Also, is the font kind of leaning forward or backward? Isn't it italicized? So what is the style of the font and how might that be different as well in addition to kind of all of the other attributes? So after scrolling through all of the fonts, personally, I like the look of Calibri. I think it's relatively clean and kind of, neutral in a lot of ways, which is fine because, again, I want my charts to stand out. I don't necessarily want the font to stand out. And I know it's relatively common, but I'm okay with that because I also don't want to pick a font that other people may not have. So I'm pretty confident that Calibri is going to be on a lot of computers. So I don't really need to worry about, someone getting something very different than what I originally designed. If you're interested, there's also a very good overall summary of typography at visual.ly called the 10 Commandments of Typography. And though we've talked about a bit of these, you can see there's also some additional information or just kind of a nice visual layout around how you go about picking and taking a look at fonts. Just wanted to add this as an additional resource around how you might consider or pick fonts. For me, the key takeaways for our dashboard, we want to limit the number of fonts to max. I'm probably going to stick to one. There may be times where we want to add a second one. Maybe I just want to use it as a header or something like that. But primarily, I'm going to limit the number of fonts to my dashboard. And if I do ever need to use two, I want to contrast it with a serif and a sans serif. I want to stay in the same mood if I use different fonts. I don't want to do two drastically different fonts. And then the other consideration for me, which I've already mentioned, is will people have the font? So I don't want to pick something kind of way out in left field where, they are going to see something vastly different than what I'd originally created. So in the end, knowing the basics of font design can be helpful for continuing your visual theme through your template and making the template as easy to read as possible.